start it?
Yes,
There
please
we
go ahead.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's get on to the next slide. The National Association of Asian American Professionals started in New York. It has been around for 38 years, and we serve Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in various industries, various sectors across North America, as well as one chapter in China. We really value the connections that we make between our members, our leaders, our board, and the companies where we work and the communities where we live. So we recruit, we help develop talent within our employers. We connect individuals across industries. We support them through our various programs. We have Women in NAP, our Career Center, ERG Leadership Training, the Self-Care and Wellness Program, and our Pride Group. And we celebrate them through our awards like NAP 100. We also convene folks for conversations about leadership and how we improve ourselves through the Leadership Convention, and this year, a virtual conference. So next slide. None of this is possible without our sponsors. You'll see that they range in geography as well as reach. We have some wonderful speakers from our sponsors today, as well as at our virtual conference in the fall. So thank you for that. We are going to turn this over to Fabian de Rosario on our board.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fabian de Rosario, hailing from Atlanta, and I want to thank all of you for calling in. This is a truly unique time here, and on behalf of the panelists, on behalf of, in fact, all of the panelists that we are featuring today are members of the National Board of Directors of NAP. And until we came together on this board, except for maybe one person, we didn't know each other. And we are united around our interest in serving the Asian American population. But today's topic is not obviously germane to the community that we serve immediately. And so I'd like to set a context of why we are coming together in just a very short time. It's only about 6 days ago that we decided that we wanted to come together to bring this community together. We are currently going through two pandemics, one of which has been going on for about 400 plus years here in the United States. We recognize that the pandemic and several issues have created a crisis, and it has an impact on people, including tragic deaths of friends, loved ones, and even people we don't know, but it has impacted us. For example, the tragic deaths of George Floyd, but also Ahmaud Arbery, right here in Georgia, where I'm at. Tamir Rice, that little kid. All of these events have now triggered many people, and certainly us, to empathize and compel us to action. It is this time of crisis where one of the helpful responses that we have learned is to have the dialogue, even as unrehearsed as we are, so that we can share information, so that we can deepen understanding. That's what this is today. Now, the panelists that I've come together to speak with you, they want to share what they are seeing in their span of sight, in their work, in the teams that they manage, in the clients that they work with, but also things that they've read, emails, just so much information has been passed around. And so we want to try to distill that and share what we are sensing. And we hope that it will be helpful to help or either to heal. Now, on behalf of these panelists, I also want to tell you that we do not feel that we know it all. In fact, we don't. We feel that we are imperfect beings, and we are very humbled by all that there is to truly try to understand. And so we're going to share our insights and present them to you as options for your consideration and choice. And it is my apologies that this is happening. In this limited time, we want to share our thoughts succinctly in the hopes to raise awareness, inspire interest, and to prompt more action on your part to have more conversations, to learn further how to conduct ourselves with others, how to talk to children, how to address people who wish to debate the issue, how to handle the difficult conversations. This is what we think leading is. We are all very passionate about this subject, and we could talk forever. I certainly can. And we all will try to remain to the 5-minute limit. And I will interject if my friends, my colleagues get so impassioned in their topics and need just a quick reminder. So I will be doing that. This is our agenda today. Each panelist will have about 3 to 5 minutes. We hope to preserve about 30 minutes of Q&A time and interaction with you. Cindy will help us manage that. And then we will close at promptly at 5:30 in an official way, but many of us would like to remain on the call for the next 30 minutes for any casual interaction. These are the topics that we have selected. You can scan them very quickly, and next to them are the individuals that will speak to their topic. They've been thinking about it over the past 20 to 24 hours, when we decided yesterday, we had a meeting yesterday, of what we wanted to speak about in a very focused way. And so with that, I invite my good friend, Michael Gonzalez, calling in from Kansas City. I knew him last year, 2 years ago, when he was the Chief Diversity Officer at Hallmark. We're so grateful to have him with us. Michael.
Thank you, Fabian. And please exercise the 5 to 6 minutes, because this is something that we're all passionate about, and it would be easy, speaking for myself, to go beyond that 5 minutes because there's so much to digest and share. But you know what I want to do, I've left the corporate world about 2 years ago, and my wife says I can't say that I retired anymore because I have a consulting business and kept very busy in the last couple of months with all of the stuff that's going on. It's amped up quite a bit. And also started teaching a course, which I'm very proud that the Kansas University has incorporated a diversity inclusion course in their business school. And I taught that inaugural class this past semester and look forward to doing that again. So, but let's get started. So my topic was why leadership. You know, people would say, like, around March 16th, the world changed. And for many, I would say that that's true, but I avoid absolutes. People that know me know that I hate absolutes because it puts you in a corner. And the reason I say that is because for the marginalized communities, it was just one more time, one more thing. It had been going on and on and on. But when COVID-19 hit fast and hard, I think we all would agree that it was different. We were in uncharted waters. People were trying and struggling in many cases just to figure out what the phenomenon was so that you'd be able to get on with your personal life, whether you'd be able to get on with your work life, whatever the case may be. And then unfortunately, as time has it, we started the blame game. So the pandemic was upon us and people felt that they needed to blame someone or some community. And I'm so proud that this board rallied together and we were having multiple conversations and saying, what can we do for our members to help fend off a lot of the misinformation, just a lot of the ugliness that was going on. And so we were in the process of talking about that and what we could do for our chapters and our members around these groundless accusations, when all of a sudden the George Floyd heinous tragedy happened. So once again, it was a gut shot. Many people were looking at this as just one more thing to go wrong, but it wasn't one more thing. It's been simmering for a long time, and the Black community will tell you it was just one more tragic example of a unfortunate, avoidable incident after incident where law enforcement and Black community collided. And unfortunately, it's gone on way too much with young African men. So things were moving pretty fast. And actually, with one of my speaking engagements, we had an original concept of what we're going to be talking about. And between that in the April timeframe to now, we've changed the topic 3 times. It is that fluid and that intense right now. But I don't want anyone to think that Mr. Floyd's death would be the tipping point. This time it's different because if you really look at the protests that are going on, it is different. It's mosaic. It isn't the Black community going out on the street to protest about another travesty. It is people from all corners of the society, people of different races, creeds, and cultures. And what that did, I think, was it forced our leaders to go off autopilot. And whether those are government leaders, law enforcement leaders, or corporate leaders, there wasn't a template to refer to be able to put a canned response together. And if there's anything good that's come out of that, it's good because they've had to actively listen. They've had to listen to be able to understand what to do or what not to do. And as I see what's happening, my personal opinion, there's 2 distinct paths. One is very polished and one is very heartfelt, what I call organic. The heartfelt is raw emotion from leaders, emotional, helplessness, guilt, not knowing what to do. And the polished approach is a well-prepped response. You know, some took the opportunity to put Black Lives Matter even on the product. So I feel bad as a corporation for you, but look, if you buy my product, it will say Black Lives Matter. And some have even said, here, let me give you the words to explain how you feel. So there are those situations where I think the movement's being taken advantage of. The personal message that I think is probably more profound is the personal message. Where it is organic, it is unpolished, it is coming from the heart and from the gut. I had one executive that actually did that, and he had his communication person warn him about putting his message out there because it made him look weak, made him look vulnerable, made him look lost. And I applauded him for that honesty, that raw honesty, where he was sharing without regard to consequence how he was feeling and what he was wanting to do but didn't know what to do. Other messages, if you've seen, have just had the right words, the themes. You hope it's sincere, but you don't know because it is just like any other message. Personal messages that I've seen, because they're sincere, it's the ones that talk about me as the individual, me as the leader. And I want to talk about what would probably, talking about leaders that can dictate change because they are in the position, they hold the levers, they are the insider group. And if we've got them to go off autopilot to appreciate what's been going on for way too long, whether it is the COVID-19 in our Asian community or with the immigration in our Latino community or the horrible situation now going on with the Black community, we've got them now, I think, in a pivotal point where they can listen and hopefully they'll act. There's a thing of position power, and those are the ones that really are in key positions where they can institute the change. And like I said, move the levers. They're the insider group. But I want the people in the audience to feel that you have that personal power. And that is your individual choice and the actions you're going to do with that. If you look at the protesters today, that's an example of very, very strong personal power that have dictated and are warranting some changes that are a long time coming. And I sat back and I looked and I wanted to figure out with really 2 distinct swim lanes on how leaders are emerging. I went back and I reflected on some of the people that I've worked for or some of the CEOs that ran corporations that I worked for. And trust me, I've had some bad ones and I've learned from them as well, but most of that's avoidance. But for the good leaders, what I found out that was common in all of them was, first, they were human. They were genuine and authentic, empathetic, and they used their position of privilege to right a wrong. They can be bold and take well-informed stances. They seek out diverse perspectives. So I'm not looking for people that walk and talk and look like me to reinforce what I want people to understand and say. They look for that diversity of opinion, and it comes in many shapes and forms. They are continual students of life and are comfortable, or they get comfortable in saying, I don't know everything about everything, which makes their life so much more uncomplicated. They're not afraid to take unpopular positions, and they take time to understand their diverse workforce, their customers, and their communities. And they lead by examples. And most of all, great leaders I know are humble, and they're doing things not for the headline, because it's just the right thing to do. So let me close before I hand this over to my colleague with a situation that is two examples of leadership. There was a situation where a gentleman came in to run this organization, and he realized that it was more exclusive than inclusive. So for the past few years, he's worked really hard to go out and educate the communities of color and culture to understand that this specific building structure, a gem of the city, is as much for them as it is for the majority. And he's worked really hard on that, very quietly. People don't know he's doing this. And there was a situation with the protests where in the proximity of his building that it was close to where the protests were. And so the police, law enforcement, set up the command center on his property unbeknownst to them, unbeknownst to him. And once he found out about that, he went to them very respectfully and just said, I can't have that. I can't have you do that. And they removed it. But what he did was he then went out to acknowledge what had happened and apologize for it. And remember, he didn't know that they were going to do that, but he took ownership and apologized to that, and then came out with a heartfelt statement that said, as a white privileged man, I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed of what's going on. I work really hard, I want to regain your trust. Let me know what I can do. He's met with members of the community of culture. He's in the process of building committees that are inclusive. It's just admirable. The second individual example of a leader is where he came to me and he said, you know, with all the stuff that's going on, he said, I went to my PR department. I'm having them put together a corporate statement for me that we'll put out, and we want to blast it across all of the social media. And he said, by the way, I also told my employees not to go down to the protest because they're dangerous and violent. Think about that. For the Black employees that work for him, how they heard that statement. And so I ask you, out of those two leaders, who would you want to work for? And with that, I'm going to hand this over to my esteemed colleague, D.A. Abrams, phenomenal man with a phenomenal story. D.A.?
Thank you, Michael. And thanks, Fabian, for the thought leadership behind planning and implementing today's session. And special thanks to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate in this very important set of topics. Again, my name's D.A. Abrams, and I'm honored to serve as the NAP National Board Treasurer. This experience continues to demonstrate to me that one doesn't need to belong to the Asian Pacific Islander community in order to belong. We are a very welcoming organization, and I, as well as many others, am grateful for that. So rather than regurgitate all that we have been witnessing regarding the lives of George Floyd, along with countless others so violently being cut short right before our own eyes, and in the case of Mr. Floyd, for the world to see, I'd like to briefly share with you what I'm hoping for and how I believe we can achieve exactly what I'm hoping for. Number one, I'm hoping that institutional racism and the police violence it gives rise to don't cause more violent deaths. Further, the systematic changes needed to eradicate institutional oppression are properly addressed. You know, categories where these sometimes invisible barriers exist are in the media, employment, the criminal justice system, healthcare, education, housing, access to credit, and in the financial services, just to name a few. For example, Blacks represent 13% of the US population, yet Blacks make up 2.5% of the nation's wealth and 40% of those incarcerated. Number two, I'm hoping that the members of the Black community, including myself, feel safe enough to move around the country as well as in our own cities, suburbs, and rural communities without worry and or without fear. Number three, I'm hoping that this is the last time that I have to search for the words to explain to my son, my nephews, my nieces, my non-Black friends, associates, and colleagues what is happening, why I believe that it is happening, and my feelings related to what is happening. Now, I think most of you will agree that today, more than ever, we're living in a media-driven society. Now, I mean, this includes social media. In my judgment, the constant promotion of negative stereotypes of African Americans in the media is a major contributor to the aforementioned. Now, here are three things that we can do as a NAP community now. Number one, can be proactive in showcasing humanity and the success of Black people outside of entertainment and sports. Number two, we can interrupt incidents when we witness a negative stereotype being played out or a lack of humanity taking place. Now, this could be done in the workplace or among your friends. In other words, if you see something, do something. And three, we can model the behavior demonstrated by NAP National as it relates to including others like myself and like Michael outside of the API community to be part of our chapters. Many are already doing this. More to come on that, though. We need more to do it. Now, in closing, given the hundreds of thousands of worldwide peaceful protesters of all backgrounds demanding change, I believe that the things that I'm hoping for, as well as the things that we can do and will very likely do now, will make my hopes a reality sooner rather than later. Now let's go to the next panelist, my good friend and fellow NAP National Board member, Donald Fan from Walmart. Donald?
Yeah. Hey, thank you. Thank you, DA. Truly appreciate your sharing, and I definitely will answer your challenge and be one of so many, and make sure we do something within our power, within our the privilege, and to influence change. And also, I would like to thank all of you as well, and taking time from this busy time, especially in the times of crisis. So many things is going on, and it's mind-boggling. And we now find ourselves living through a time with great uncertainty and change, and navigating multiple concurrent crises. It's not just a one time of the crisis. And I believe at a certain point, we all experience or feel puzzled and shocked, sad, and even angry, right? If you were a leader or entrepreneur, and you would experience even more pressure and the stress, and contemplate how I lead through this challenging time with the people around me. And my experience taught me that empathy is the #1 leadership quality to maintain the well-being of our mental and the physical health. When we motivate inspire people in getting through this tough time. Now, psychology defines empathy as the ability to be aware, recognize, understand, share, and advocate the thoughts and the feelings of others. And developing empathy is vital for establishing trust-based relationships and also behaving compassionately. Empathy occurs in 3 stages, and cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and compassionate empathy. Let me unpack it a little bit. Now, first, cognitive empathy means the becoming aware of emotional state of others through listening attentively, listening to learn and understand with an open mind. And I'm willing to meet the unmet. I'm willing to listen to unheard. And also I'm willing to understand the unknown. This effort will help us to answer the question of why. Why are they in today's emotional state? And for quite a while, and I perceive a leader as a problem solver, decision maker. Now people approach to us for an answer, solutions. I should know it all. But reality teach me the opposite. And that I should transform the fixed mindset of I know it all to a growth mindset of learn it all by practicing cognitive empathy. And in the last couple of days, we run a couple of virtual listening sessions with our associates and to unfold the impact of this crisis. More than 5,000 people joined the open conversations. The feedback is enormous, and also the impact is profound. This is a kind of example of cognitive empathy. Second, emotional empathy means that we need to further internalize the learning from cognitive empathy and engage with and share those emotions of others. Now, can I feel their pain as the DA shared with us, their fears, their frustrations, and their needs? Can I identify gap for change? It's very critical. And this effort helps answer the question of what? What should I do? Or where should I play to help change the situation or help unload emotional burden? Now, in this systemic, I would say institutional systemic racism case, and we are focusing our efforts in 4 identified areas: finance, education, healthcare, and the criminal justice system. We believe a change in these areas can contribute to turning around injustice and the racial inequity. Now, finally, compassionate empathy means taking care of, taking action to support others. Without this step, change won't occur. And empathy doesn't impact anything. Now, when companies are forced to confront these kind of racism situations, the responses are often predictable, right? The playbook is issue a public statement, select an African-American organizations, have a corporate foundations that make a contribution. Then we call it done. We know this is insufficient and it won't affect the lasting change. And at a personal level, the action can be very simple as reaching out to my African-American friends and colleagues to offer help and the support. Now, I believe in I also committed to being vocal against racial discrimination and imparity. I want to be a true ally by leveraging the privilege and the power I have to influence change. We all know crisis is a terrible thing to waste. So we need to maximize our learning from it and become smarter when we get out of it, right? And also, we know crisis reveals character. Make sure we have it. We have what it takes to be our best in such times. Let me leave you with this. Empathetic leaders believe we're in this together. It's essential for us to think about others, care for others, and always be ready to offer help and support. Just remember, this is not a Black's problem. This is everyone's problems. And I don't think you cannot be part of a change. Let's learn to tell the stories that brings us all together and show us a way forward. This panel discussion is one example of doing that. Now I'm going to turn over my dear friend, Elizabeth Young. Elizabeth is an attorney and served as a former NAP national, president of former NAP National Council. Here you go, Liz.
Thank you so much, Donald. Yeah, so my role here today is to share with you all about the business owner's perspective regarding the pandemic, as well as the family perspective, you know, how the pandemic has been affecting families across our nation. So following up on Donald's segment about empathy, a lot of business owners at this point are pivoting their businesses because they have to be especially empathetic towards their employees. You know, it's not only about being able to do the work anymore, but also about how to stay mentally healthy during this very unpredictable and unstable time. You know, employees across different companies are experiencing higher rates of depression, of suicide, of unstable mental wellness. So it's very important for employers and business owners to be sensitive to these kind of situations. Some employers have been giving extra paid time off, you know, different benefits, counseling, free counseling for employees. So these are all things to take into consideration. If you're an employee as well, you got to put your mental health first to take priority. Businesses are also pivoting in different ways as well, such as different marketing tactics, not just, you know, leadership amongst the leaders, but they have to shift their business tactics in order to continue getting business and not go bankrupt. One example that has occurred here in LA, we have a company called Mr. and Mrs. Creamery, and they used to be a professional catering company to a lot of corporate events and large private events. And since the pandemic started, all this has, you know, been put to an end. There's no more events at all, and we don't know when big events are going to come back into play. So how they've pivoted is they've started doing a bake sale, and they've started baking different flavors of tofu cheesecake, and it's all of a sudden went viral, and they're actually doing more profits than they were prior to the pandemic. So this is one example of how a business has stayed successful even during the pandemic. Another quick example is there's a restaurant here in LA called Howling Rays. They always have a line out the door. They're located in Chinatown, and they serve the best spicy fried chicken. The line is usually 2 hours long. And so with the pandemic, you know, there's no way they can do social distancing. So they've never done delivery in the span of their lifetime of the business. And now they're doing delivery. So businesses at this point, you just have to be adaptable. You have to be able to quickly change, you know, based on the circumstances of the society. Now that things are reopening up and folks are going back into the office to work, there's also going to be a lot of changes there too that businesses have to pivot, such as having hand sanitizers ready for all employees, preparing masks for everybody, having the workstations cleaned regularly. Because can you think, how much liability a company will face if one of their employees were ordered to go back to work and ended up getting sick? That's going to be big lawsuits against every company. All right. So from a family perspective, as a divorce attorney, I've seen a lot of internal affairs and problems within households. So, the unemployment rate, as you guys all know, is currently 14.7%, the worst since the Great Depression. And so people are stressed out about finances. They don't know when they're going to get another job or when they're going to go back to work. And being locked up in the same household has had tremendously negative impacts on families. So the divorce rates are on an all-time high. And the courts are closed. In Los Angeles, they're closed until June 22nd, and there might be a further delay until July. So I'm sure the courts across the nation are all closed as well. So people can file, but they can't get any court hearings unless it's like an emergency, such as, a domestic violence or a kidnapping. But a lot of the cases are in limbo, and when courts reopen, everything's going to be delayed. It's going to be a huge mess. So, with all the divorce rates going up and the domestic violence rates going up, we just have to really be open-minded and be empathetic to families going through these issues. And, like DA said, just continue spreading, word about our humanity and being kind to everyone you see on the street. Child abuse is at an all-time high too, but a lot of the cases are not being reported because teachers are usually the ones who report child abuse cases. And now that the kids are not in school, a lot of child abuse cases are being hidden, and they're not going to come, into perspective and into our knowledge until everything reopens. And so we just have to be open-minded and be prepared for a lot of things that are changing during this pandemic. So with that, I'm going to introduce the next speaker, which is Kim Cummings. She's the Assistant Vice President of HR at BNSF Railway, and she was the founder of NAP Dallas-Fort Worth before recently joining the NAP National Board. So over to you, Kim.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. So thank you all. I'm happy to be here to meet with you. It has personally been a very emotional time for me. The balance of being a business leader and all of the woes that Elizabeth mentioned, helping my teams with their emotions. We've gone through some furloughs, some layoffs, divorces, personal problems as it relates to people with disabilities, and then having to deal with financial woes with a down economy. And then, getting ready for folks to return back to the workplace so that they're safe with COVID-19. So we thought all of that was a challenge at the beginning of the year, and it just gets worse. So personally and professionally, I am struggling, and I'm admitting that to you all because your leaders are all humans. The people that you look up to, the leaders you have in your organization are also struggling. But in my particular case, the adrenaline and the compassion is in overdrive. I'm ready to bring back our workforce, get re-engaged with my teams, and more dynamically work to combat racism and promote equality. And I say that because we need to talk more about that. I mean, that's what I do. I feel like we've done a lot in that space. However, there's just more work to do. Engage more with the community and really educate my workforce and my populations around how we make meaningful change, and not just to talk about what's going on right now. Listening is great, but action is even more important. So you could say I kind of have multiple personalities as I'm trying to balance the realistic impacts of we have to move the supply chain because you all want your Amazon packages on time, to ensuring that UPS and FedEx and others are, getting what they need from us as a business user in the supply chain. So some of the things that I'm asking myself and I'm challenging you all to do right now before you enter, the workforce and back to the workplace is, you know, do you feel physically and emotionally and mentally safe to return to the workplace? And really question why or why not. You know, in the beginning, it was helping in the beginning for me, it was helping employees and my nonprofit organizations kind of feel comfortable with this virtual touch environment. I mean, my organization was not a work from home friendly company. And to, in an instant, immediately change that perspective where over 20,000 of our employees are now working from home was just a dramatic change for us. You know, this idea of being a cheerleader of support, showing my care as an HR professional, because those kind of tie in together. And then, you know, then what happened, and hearing the horrible comments about COVID-19 being referenced as a Chinese virus, you know, and having to work with my Asian community here, both internally, externally, really we were just trying to, you know, level set. Really, it was a matter of when are we going to win? When are we going to like move on and really, you know, move the business forward? But I have to tell you, and I'm honestly saying this because I'm transparent in this way, you know, I'm embarrassed. I'm disappointed. I'm sad and angry for the lack of the Asian police officer who stood and watched George Floyd plead for his life. You know, for the excuses that I'm hearing from my friends and my circle and my partners who lack compassion. You know, I'm conflicted, you know, with my family members who are in law enforcement and, you know, dealing with my Black cousins on, you know, why we just stood there. And, you know, how can I be a cheerleader in that space? And how can I get in check with how I feel with my emotions? So those are the questions I'm asking myself. And am I ready to enter the workforce? And if I'm not, what do I need to do to get ready? So, you know, I'm enlightened that I can work and do more, and I'm all in it to win it, and to ensure that our folks are right there with me. And while there's no right answer to the question, it is important for you to answer them. And what happens when you answer the question isn't what you want, and you have to be right with the answers you get and be okay with that. The second thing I wanted to mention is your interests are important. So I'm gonna put my HR hat back on. You guys advocate for yourselves. There are company policies on anti-harassment and discrimination, equality, and EEO statements. Every organization has that, regardless of if you are an entrepreneur with your own small business, medium-sized business, and these large companies. Protect yourself, follow up, look at the rules. You know, when your employer says these are, you know, things we're putting into place for your safety as it relates to COVID-19, your job can be in jeopardy if you don't follow the rules as it relates to personal safety with COVID-19. Wearing the mask, using the sanitizer, watching, you know, the tape and where you walk and how many people are in an elevator, all of those things matter. So please pay attention to that, because the last thing you need is to be challenged around rules that you should know. I would also say that before you go back to the workplace or go back to your business partners is find your advocacy groups, your sponsors, know more about your resource groups, and get engaged with HR, you know, outreach efforts. You know, now's not the time to be silent, and, you know, you need to be able to share your feelings with someone, but you need to find out who those people are. So many of the presenters today have shared that you have to be out there and you have to, you know, engage in the conversation. And if you're not doing that now, you're not going to do it when you go back to the workplace. So start now. The other thing I'll mention is to be proactive with your questions. Just like on your first day on the job, you're re-entering the workplaces now. Just remember how you felt, all of the questions that you had. Think about what you need and where you can find the information. Who can you go for support? I mean, if you're struggling with, I'm not ready physically or emotionally, you know, who's going to answer those questions for me? And what if my questions, you know, are compromised? Maybe I get an answer at the beginning of all of this, but then when I get back to the workplace, you know, what if it's not exactly the way I thought it was going to be? So who do I go to and how do I challenge that just from a returning to the workplace perspective? And then remember, your leaders are just as apprehensive as you are. I mean, listen, and it starts with you. Self-awareness, educating yourself, looking at the number of resources that are available that your company provides, looking at their portal, asking your manager, HR representative, key sponsor. It's time to start asking those questions. Additionally, as you know, I or others on the call are able to share those resources with you as well, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you don't know where to start. You have a collective group here that are willing to help you with all of that, from writing a policy to sharing impactful racial TED Talks or helping you with town hall meetings. All of us are here to help you with that. And then I have two more other points. So break the golden rule. Treat others as they would like to be treated. And again, emphasizing that you're probably going to get it wrong and be okay with that. But have the real dialogue and nurture those relationships, because being present now more than ever is important. Google summarizes it perfectly for me, that no one wants to be left behind or leave part of their personality and inner life at home. But to be fully present at work, to feel psychologically safe, we must know that we can be free to make these decisions. And we must be open to encouraging others to follow along with us. So there's so many things that you can advocate for yourself now. Be prepared. Don't be left out in the cold. You have support. You have people that can help you. And I appreciate the time that you've given all of us today to help you with that transition. So now I'd like to pass it on over to our very own Betty Lowe, who is our current chair of National. Betty?
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. And I echo the sentiments of all of my fellow board members, and no doubt that, all of the crisis and recent events have shaken many of us to the core. And, like you, I'm facing feelings of outrage and unrest and anxiety and all of that. For me, I have been in the D&I space as well as the OCM, or organizational change management space, for a while now, working with different organizations, Fortune 500 companies, as well as governmental agencies. And what I've seen is that change is difficult, and especially when we come across a time of unrest and crisis, that change enables us to think about how that affects us in a very personal way. And so, for me, I just want to go ahead and help people think through what might be some of the proactive ways in which we can go about managing this change and reduce the chaos that we all feel and the anxiety that we feel. But more importantly, it helps us work towards a solution and hopefully find a better outcome. We might not have all of the solutions, but we can certainly initiate a discussion around ideas to help challenge what's been the status quo. And the status quo sometimes doesn't work. And we know that, it's not working. So we need to come up with a better outcome through dialogue. The first thing, of course, is really around communication and investing in transparent and purposeful messaging. But we all know that effective communication is at the center of any good leader. But in a time of crisis and change, there are certain things that we can do to make sure that we connect better. And one of the most important things to remember is that we need to listen with empathy first. And that's part of the reason why, Donald, my fellow board member, Donald, had a whole section around empathy, because you have to walk 1,000 miles in my shoes just to see what it's like to be me. And that's so true when we think about what we're facing as a nation. As Asian Americans, we might not know all of the challenges and tribulations that our Black brothers and sisters face on a day-to-day basis, but it is our responsibility to commit to listening and to learn. And that is so important, because it's only when we listen first that we understand. And with that understanding, we can lead with ideas and communicate with empathy and purpose. So once we listen and understand, what do we need to do to communicate? We need to communicate with clear, consistent, and fact-based information, especially during a time of crisis. And we've seen this play out in our nation's dealings with, COVID-19. Like, the fact-based information is so critically important to help guide us through any sort of change and any sort of crisis. So the last thing I would say about communications, that absolutely agree with Kim in that we need to step up and speak up when there is injustice. I know culturally we've been taught not to make any ripples and not to make any waves and keep our heads down and focus on our work. But we've got to learn as a community that by not saying anything, we are saying something. And we need to recognize and lament with our Black brothers and sisters for whom such injustice has long been a daily reality, and that we have a responsibility to speak up for them and for our community and for our nation, and most importantly for our generation, the next generation that comes after us. I think how this relates to my daughter and what she's having to deal with in terms of the COVID crisis and learning from home. But then on top of that, with all of the, unrest and the riots, as well as the peaceful protests. And I had to help her understand the difference between the peaceful protest aspect and what people are really saying in that peaceful protest, and what that means and how it relates to her as a multiracial kid that's growing up in our community. And sometimes if we don't have the conversation, we leave that opportunity behind to really help shape the minds and the thoughts of others around us. And I realize, by just speaking to her around what that means, I am impacting one person's life, but she might be able to also impact others within her circle of friends. So I think we need to, understand that communicating and not saying anything, just like the police officer in Minnesota, sometimes is a bigger message. The next aspect is engagement. So naturally, with more communication, we have more engagement. And we need to lead by example and foster an environment of teamwork and collaboration. This means connecting more with people and understand what people are going through. So I think about the additional engagement that we've been able to have as a NAP community through our weekly virtual happy hours, when COVID hit. And it's certainly generated more opportunities for collaboration on new programs and new ideas. So it's been great to witness that aspect of it. Adaptability. So this is so important when things change around you. So when COVID hit in mid-March, when COVID hit and during mid-March, we had to close down and adhere to the stay-at-home orders. NAP needed to issue some guidance on how chapters come together and meet. And so Cindy, our executive director, and I have had many conversations on how we as an organization need to adapt to the new reality. So we took this opportunity to accelerate our virtual and online national programs and have even gained more traction to have more diverse attendees from across the US and other community groups. So that's a silver lining in the adaptability as we shift to other ways of engagement. So resilience, we have to be resilient, and that means both physically and mentally. Being resilient means that we need to generate energy to endure the short term, but then have the energy to sustain the long term. So this can't be a sprint, it needs to be a marathon. And we need to protect our own physical and mental health so that we can endure this challenge. For myself and my family, we do try to go on daily walks and have discovered new trails and paths around my community. And it really has helped recenter me. You know, I'm sure like many of you, you're on back-to-back calls all day long. And I look forward to those, you know, daily walks, because it's a way for me to disconnect and then recenter me so that hopefully I have the resilience to continue. Another aspect of being resilient is reflecting on our past failures for what went wrong, and help determine how we will correct it the next time. So with the George Floyd situation, it has enabled me to think about the many situations that I've been witness to. I was putting myself in, you know, in the other officer's shoes. Like, if I'm in that situation, what could I have done differently so that the outcome is different? So, and I started thinking about all of the other situations in the past where I've been put in difficult situations. And sometimes I have spoken up, but there are many times where I realized, you know what, I lost an opportunity. But that self-reflection, hopefully, it's enabled me to think about, how do I need to go ahead and shape my 2-minute discussion so that I can gain control of the message and gain confidence to say the right things if I'm ever put in that situation again. And then finally, innovation, right? So the final aspect of putting all of this together, the communication, engagement, being adaptable, and being resilient, is that we need to do something different. And we need new ways of thinking. And sometimes when we're put in difficult situations, we're forced to come up with new and fresh ideas. So we do have the responsibility to lead and innovate within our community to come up with compelling purpose to help our community navigate through some of these challenges and open up the dialogue so that we can lead with compassion and empathy. And you know, a great example of that is Camden, New Jersey, a town about 60 miles from where I live, just across from Philly. They actually got rid of their police department. The city was in a public safety crisis, and you know, the murder rate was high. It was like 18 times higher than national average. And there were excessive force complaints by the police force. So the mayor and the city council dissolved their police department and formed a county-wide force back in 2013. And as part of that, the former chief, Thompson, led the effort and revamped the hiring process. And while a majority of the police force was rehired, they had to complete a new application, a 50-page application, retake psychological testing, and go through an extensive interviewing process to reshape the thinking of the police department. They also implemented many other changes, which included more community connection activities and more engagement and programs where the police had you know, programs connecting with the local schools and community centers. And then also, you know, it helped change the way that officer performance was measured. So they ended up, you know, doing away with the metrics of, you know, the number of arrests or tickets issued, but they focused on other outcomes. And since then, homicides have gone down from 67 in 2012 to 25 in 2019. So
those are remarkable, Betty.
Yeah,
you're gonna wrap
so
up
that's
here?
just an example of how we need to really think about driving innovation to rethink what we've done.
Thank you very much.
So that we can do it differently.
Great. Hey, thank you, Betty. Folks, I'd like to take you through this last slide before I hand it over to Michael to wrap it up and reset the context of leadership here. Here are several other topics that we thought about that we just don't have the time to cover because we still want to make sure that we have some Q&A time with you. The first is inviting you to think about the fact that we are part of the human race. We have to realize the interconnectedness that we have. We share the same air, we share the same planet, and the reliance that we have towards each other. Think about the quality of life that we have and how much we need each other to help fulfill that. And so my invitation to you on behalf of the panelists is ask yourself in these difficult times with pockets of our community that are suffering and going through these inequities, can you be an ally? Will you be an ally? Understand as well, just as we do, we don't know it all. We are imperfect beings. And so it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to be vulnerable. As Michael said earlier on, the best demonstration of leadership is when you surround yourself with people who are smarter and better than you. And so understand that you can be imperfect, and you can, and one of the ways that you can be strong in how you show up with others is to be grounded in your own values and to take a stand to be that ally. Manage your unconscious biases. Implicit biases and unconscious biases is at the very root of the difficulties that we have been facing, that has erupted into revealing the crisis that we've always had in our communities. We just haven't seen it because many of us live in our bubbles and it remains masked and covered. Manage our unconscious biases. Be a truth seeker. And this is hard because going back to unconscious biases, there's something called the confirmation biases that we see the news channels that we like to see. We pursue the information that helps to feed and grow and confirm our own filters. So I ask you to be a truth seeker. And when you seek the truth, vary it up so that you see a much broader set of differing perspectives so that you can draw your own opinion about that. And if you decide that you've got to change your point of view, it's okay to pivot, right? It's okay to pivot because remember, we're imperfect beings that are trying to seek the truth. And so you can have a change of mind and a heart and be open and admit to that. Listen, learn, listen, understand. Betty covered that. Empathy and compassion, Donald covered that. Be ready to have the difficult conversation. As Betty said, for many of us, by virtue of our culture and upbringing, we love to preserve harmony. Well, there comes a time where doing nothing is not going to change anything. So learn to speak up and to speak forward, and that means being constructive. Finally, it is very important to begin to heal and be optimistic. And so one way that you can help give you the energy, the resilience that Betty spoke of, is to appreciate what you have, to be grateful, to show appreciation, and to take care of yourself, and to also take care of others. And I believe that's how we demonstrate leadership. Michael? You're on mute right now. Michael?
There we go. Sorry about that. So I just want to spend a couple minutes trying to recap what everyone just talked about, which are really some important lessons, some actionable things that you can do as you exercise your role as a leader, whether that's a personal role or whether you're in a leadership role. But, you know, one of the things I really liked what Donald said is that crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And, you know, what Oliver Wendell Holmes said was our hearts were touched by fire. He did that in the middle of the Civil War. And he said that was the opportunity to help create and foster change, to change what we were to be a better place going forward. And you do that with grace and integrity. And you know, one of the things I think with leaders is that they'll step back, they'll regroup, they'll rethink, and they'll re-engage. They don't hunker down on a point of view. And sometimes that's vulnerable. Sometimes that's risky because you're going into an area that is new and novel to you. But I think in order to be relevant for your community, to be a relevant leader, you have to be able to do that. And they learned from their failures. You know, one of the things that I've learned from the powerful leaders that I've worked with is they encourage you to go out and try. They encourage you to go out and do something that is outside of the norm. And if you fail, it's okay, and learn from it and move on. Not that any of you are narcissists, so this is for your bosses. Tell your narcissists to set that aside and put others first. I think Betty brought up a good point when she said, and I'll give you a personal example, when there was things that my friends would say that were inappropriate, right at the beginning, I would sit back and go, I'm doing my job when I walk away from that and I don't participate in that joke or in that story. But then I sat back and I said, that's not enough. And back to Betty's point is, that's the moment, that's an education moment for you to tell those friends that that is totally inappropriate. And if they haven't walked away, to explain why. And don't spend a lot of time on the whys, but, you know, learn and course correct. Be courageous. You know, Frederick Douglass said, he was an escaped slave and an abolitionist, said, step into your fears. And that's what I tell leaders all the time. It's okay to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I relieve the pressure valve with them when I say, you don't need to know everything, you know, but I do ask you to be a student. So with that, I'm going to hand that back over to Fabian, and I think we're in the question mode.
Thank you very much, Michael. To each and every one of my fellow board members, thank you so much for preparing some remarks. I frankly was, other than establishing the topic, I wasn't quite sure exactly what you're going to say. So thank you for emailing these bullet points so I can put it on the master deck here. And the bullet points came at almost to 40 minutes before we started. So I'm just grateful for the friendship that I have with you and for your leadership. With that, Cindy, is there a question that you've lined up for any one of us?
There are many questions, and I wanted to start with an easy one because I know the other ones will probably take a little bit more time. Question for Elizabeth: is it legal for a company to take employee temperatures upon return to the workplace?
So I'm actually not a labor and employment lawyer, but just from what I've heard in the community so far, there are employers who are taking employees' temperature when they return to work. So as far as I know, it's legal. I haven't heard anything saying otherwise.
Yeah, the Department of Labor and EEOC have issued statements that say for personal safety, it is, as long as they are protecting medical personal information and that the folks that are doing the temperature checks are qualified individuals. So yes, employers can take your temperature.
It is. We've been practicing for last a couple of months for the store associates, and they need to have a temperature tested.
Thank you, Rob.
That's settled.
Yep.
What's next?
Another question for Donald. You mentioned a lot about empathy. What do you think the relationship between empathy and social consciousness is to corporate profit?
Okay, that's a good question. Actually, it's a little bit tough, but I can share with you a couple of examples so illustrate what we look at this and what we do about this. And the one is you may heard from the news a couple of weeks ago, actually last week, and we announced the $100 million the giving to create a Center for Social Justice. And focusing on those four things I talked in my session. And this is finance, education, healthcare, and the criminal justice systems. And you may know our CEO, Doug McMillon, and he serves as a chair of Business Board. Business Board is a huge platform for about 180 CEOs of big companies in the United States. Many of those companies are global companies. And they put it a committee and also addressing the social justice on those four areas. Actually, AT&T CEOs is charged to be responsible for the, let me see, it's criminal justice systems. And JP Morgan's CEO is responsible for the finance reform. And so it's real, and it's coming up. You will see a lot of change driven by the big corporations, and make sure business world is care about it. I think the other example I would like to share with you is 300,000. We hired 300,000 employees during the last 2 months. Think about it, 300,000, and 51% of them are women. And 53% of them are people of color. And 54% are Generation Z. So I think this is definitely tells how we see what we do really will impact the society, community, and it also, balance up the profit side of it. And our CEO, Doug McMillon, is very serious. And actually, the Friday, on each Friday afternoon, we have a officer meetings. It's a VP and above. And he specifically said, if you cannot lead in an absolute inclusion way in this company, you need to find somewhere else to work because you don't share our values. And I hope it answers your questions. And it also, we have our foundation offer us a list of the donation places. I'm like the organizations or charities we can donate, and the foundation will match the amount we donate, so doubling on the contributions for the change.
Great, thank you. So another question is a little bit different. It is from a person who has adult children living with her. What's the best way to channel your adult children's anger towards what's going on with the systemic racism, inequality during this pandemic? Protests are great, but there's got to be other alternatives for them. I think we covered a lot of them, but would you have some kind words for this parent?
Anyone to tackle this? Elizabeth, yes.
Yeah, so as a parent, and someone who's dealing with a lot of families, I've gotten concerns about this as well. Not just with adult children, but also with younger children too. They're all very confused about what's going on. So having open communication and education is key. Allowing them to vent their thoughts and their questions, and just creating this opportunity for open dialogue is very important. Of course, taking the children out to the protest. We've seen a lot of news articles with pictures of kids out on the streets in the protest. That's very effective too. But if you don't want to take them out to the protest, and having open dialogues, either within the family, or with other friends and colleagues in the community, would be very useful.
Any other bills? There is tremendous resource everywhere now. I think CNN recently had a Sesame Street, or at least I saw a CNN report of us. Sesame Street was producing something, so parents can get some assistance, or maybe even use some of the things that are being produced to help you have that conversation. But the key is this, I think, is definitely have the conversation, because to just let them ignore it, or to tell them to turn off the TV because it's just too much, or to try to shield them from it, is not getting them in touch with the reality. That's what I'm seeing in the landscape.
Yeah, just to reiterate again, the Hollaback training, which Cindy had sent the link again in the chat, that training can be for adults and for children.
Yeah, it's called Bystander Intervention Training, and it's being offered free as a public service by the Asian Americans Advancing Justice, as well as Hollaback, which is a global organization. So if you want to look for it, just look for iHollaback. Okay, so there are a couple of questions that get back to the incidents of police brutality. Early in the conversation today, Michael Gonzalez mentioned police leadership cannot make a radical change. And one of our listeners said, why? And additionally, someone said, what do you think about defunding the police? What does that even mean? Michael, would you take that on?
Yeah, I don't think, if I said that I don't think police can make radical change, that may be my subconscious. I hope they do. I think it is different. I think there's an opportunity now to where they can't just go back and handle it like they have in the past. I think there's a lot of people inside some of the law enforcement agencies that are acknowledging that it's time for a change. There is a law enforcement officer here in Kansas City who is working on putting together a bill or a proposition to where there's a database where police officers who have been let go because of ill will or charges against them can't go to another state and get hired. But let me say, I mean, there are a hell of a lot of good officers out there, but they need a lot of work, and it can't be transactional. It needs to be sustaining training around how to understand our marginalized communities and how to relate to them. The other thing I think with defunding, and I hope this is the case, is it's a more reallocation of funds. Is that why you're not going to be buying the guns and that stuff, but you're going to convert that money into hiring mental health experts, social workers, that when they go on a call and it's somebody that may be having a mental crisis, is that you've got somebody there that knows how to deal with that individual. That's how I would like to see the dollars reallocated.
Michael,
Again,
if I could, yes, go ahead, finish your thought.
No,
Finish your thought.
I was just going to say, and the other thing I think that's novel about this time is you've now got community leaders and business leaders who are saying we need to look at some institutional changes on how law enforcement is set up, because a lot of times they are their own gatekeeper. And so if there's an issue, they handle that internally rather than, you know, their HR department or an objective third party going in and trying to understand what the situation was and to do the fact finding to come up with a fact-based decision and solution. So I think you're going to probably see some things change in that arena as well.
What I wanted to add, Michael, is that people need to, you remember when I said about seeking the truth? People need to understand the issue before they start using simple taglines and leaving it to the rest of the imagination. The defunding the police is not what it appears to be at the surface level. It is exactly what Michael is talking about. It's about, instead of putting more money into the police so that they can suit up and look like they're going to invade a country, it's apportioning the money to solutions that, like what Betty talked about. It's about innovation. Here in the city of Atlanta, for a couple of years now, the Atlanta Police Foundation, all right, they have intervened into a at-risk community, and it has built community centers that are staffed by policemen, where a portion of their shift actually is served in that community center. I believe they have 2 now. In what we call the English Avenue neighborhood, and they do tutoring, they do classes. Sometimes they'll do a food drive and food packing, and the community members, they interact with the police at eye to eye, and the program also provides a subsidy for policemen and women in Atlanta to buy a house and live in that community. Now, that is not a novel idea. We call it community policing. But the community center that I speak of, these are new innovations that are going to create the necessary intervention with the young people, so that they see police men and women not only as law enforcers, but also as partners to help heal a community, and the crime rates in that particular English Avenue community has been dropping consistently ever since they have paid attention to that. Let me yield to my other colleagues or to Cindy for a new question.
Any other comments on this particular one about defunding police? Okay. I think this might be the final question, and this is a really good one. First of all, Amy asked that as a person who's immigrated to the US at an older age, she wanted to find resources to communicate with her parents that it's not just a Black problem. How do you start a conversation with older Asian community members? And many people in the chat provided some translations, and so thank you for that. But a follow-up question to that was, how about the other way? How do we actually talk to Black and brown communities that systemic racism cuts across all people of color?
To that, I would say, I think everybody, well, I should say African Americans, Hispanics, Latinx understand that. So it's not that it's unique to African Americans or the Latinx community at all. I mean, these things happen to, all people of color. We understand that. What we're seeing in the news as of late for, I don't know, maybe the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, caught on film in many cases, are African Americans being brutally murdered. So I think that's what brings it to the top in terms of what we're talking about now. And if you look at what has recently happened, in my view, it probably just would have been just one more thing had we not been going through a global pandemic, which Fabian spoke of, had unemployment not been at, I don't know, 40 million, 42 million individuals. The rate of unemployment is around 14%. The African-American community, it's 16 or, it's higher. Not sure what it is in the Asian American Pacific Islander community, but I'm saying it's sort of like a confluence. It's a perfect storm right now, in my judgment. But I would say, as I said in the beginning, it's not just an African-American problem. I do think it's a problem for most people of color that live in the United States of America. And just to go back to what I mentioned earlier, like the stereotypes are pretty serious. I mean, they're pretty serious. My wife and I, we used to own a home in Phoenix, Arizona. And when we would go there, we had close friends that lived there. And when we would go there, the news is very different. Like if you turn down the news for the first 5 or 10 minutes, the images that you see are very, very negative. So there it wasn't so much what was happening within the African-American community. It was really the Hispanic community in a big way every night. So people are seeing these negative images each and every day. So when the police are policing and doing their jobs, I mean, they have these unconscious bias moments. Some of it is conscious. Some of it is confirmation bias, as was spoken to earlier. I mean, these images, they're very, very powerful. So you're going into a situation with not a lot of compassion. You're just waiting. Actually, you're looking for something to go wrong. And then coupled with that, if the individuals on the other end of that are, in most cases, if they're not really prepared to how to deal with that, how to deal with being stopped by the police, how to react in a very peaceful manner, it just escalates right away and it can go south immediately. So again, I don't think it's just an African-American or Latinx problem. It is, in my view, a people of color problem in the country. It's an other problem in the country. And if we can bind together, get together, I mean, I think it's better. And that's why these peaceful protests, in my view, are so powerful, because it's not just African Americans marching in the streets, it's more mosaic.
And I would argue, DA, that if there is going to be some changes made in the way that law enforcement and communities appreciate and respect the Black community, that's going to have a residual benefit to Latinos who worry about being pulled off their lawn and sent to the border while they're waiting to be deported. So that's why, you know, I think with here in Kansas City, there was a large contingent of Latino employees that were supporting the Black protest, the Black movement. And that was really, I think their mantra was, by helping our Black brothers and sisters, that's going to help our cause as well.
I have an answer. I'm an immigrant, and I used to have a full-time job. And the protections that Kim Cummings talked about in terms of equal employment opportunity and non-discrimination, you know where that came from? The Civil Rights Act in 1960s, when mostly Black people and some white people took to the streets to protest so that we could have legislation that protects my rights and protects everybody's rights. And the legislation doesn't say Black only. It includes people like me. It includes people, now we have other legislation that protects people with disabilities. So, you know, this question makes me think about what is happening a lot now in recent light, and about, hey, don't all lives matter? What's this Black Lives Matter? Okay, I get it. Okay, I can empathize. You know, they use the word, right? But don't all lives matter? Hey, wait a minute now. Yeah, all lives matter, but Black Lives Matter is about a focus on something that is on fire. If my house is on fire, the fire engines that are going to pull up to the house, they're going to start putting out the fire on my house. And if my next door neighbor says, hey, what about my house? You know, like, doesn't my house matter too? Well, you know what? If your house is on fire, I'll put your fire out too. But right now, my house is on fire. And whatever good that can come from this, on this focus, you and I know that whatever that gets put in place, whether that's another community center that is built by the police in the community, the rerouting of funds for law enforcement, for where it really can create effective change, or new legislation that protects the people that have a very soft voice, everybody gets the benefit. Everybody gets the benefit. So why would I not take responsibility and accountability to push forward to affect change? Cindy, I think we're out of time, at least on a formal level. Do you want to wrap it up with this final slide, and then we will, do a formal finish, end the recording, and for those of us who'd like to stick around for some additional conversation, let's do that. Cindy, over to you.
Thank you so much. And a big round of applause virtually to all of our panelists and to all of you who came to participate and ask such wonderful questions, really insightful ones. I am going to just mention that in the month of June, NAP is taking an initiative to find those within our membership who want to join a task force. We are hoping by next week to have a task force of folks that want to create a curriculum, create partnerships with other organizations, not just Asian ones, that really look at inclusion all around. So if you are interested in that, please contact me. On June 27th, NAP will be joining the APIA Vote, a national civic engagement organization for presidential town hall. Registration is free. If they ask you, oh, how did you hear about it? Please tell them NAP sent you. There are unlimited seats in that case. And finally, NAP will be hosting a Better Normal. This is an idea that we have for a virtual conference about creating a better workforce when we get back, more conscientious leadership, and connecting all of our AAPI community leaders as well as other non-AAPI leaders. With that, those are our announcements. I thank you for coming. And again, we're open to staying and just opening up the lines and having conversations with all of you. But thank you for spending the last 90 minutes with us.
Very good. Eileen, I think you're managing the recording, so go ahead and turn that off. Thank you very much for doing that. And to all